Okay, we're live. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our monthly AADL board meeting. I'm calling our meeting to order. Eli, have you been able to take attendance?
Yes, I have.
Terrific. Before we approve the agenda, I just wanted to make a statement on behalf of the board in solidarity with our Asian and Asian American communities. We've witnessed some incredibly heinous acts of violence and hatred and racism. And it has been profoundly disturbing personally, and I know to my colleagues. And I just want our public to know that we are preparing an official response and that the library stands with these communities and against these racist acts. And we are here as a resource as an institution, and we will continue to be a resource to our communities. Thanks for letting me say that. And we'll move on to approve the agenda.
We need attendance, Jen.
We did attendance.
Okay, all right.
And we need to make an adjustment to the agenda in order to discuss a resolution around authorizing remote board participation. So may I have a motion to look at a resolution for authorizing board participation?
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. Is there any discussion about this addition to the agenda? We will discuss the item later. Great. So we will move to approve the agenda with this amendment. Do I need to do a call for the addition first?
Yes.
Yes. So that's a roll call vote.
All right, Trustee Ackman,
Yes.
Trustee Kleinman,
Yes.
Trustee Leha,
Yes.
Trustee Moore,
Yes.
Trustee Solomon,
Yes.
Trustee Trudeau,
Yes.
Trustee Vanderbroek.
Yes.
Amendment to the agenda passes.
Great. And now we need a motion to approve the agenda overall as amended.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All right, then I'll call the vote.
Okay, Trustee Ackman,
Yes.
Trustee Kleinman,
Yes.
Trustee Leha,
Yes.
Trustee Moore,
Yes.
Trustee Solomon,
Yes.
Trustee Trudeau,
Yes.
Trustee Vanderbroek.
Yes.
Agenda is approved.
Terrific. All right. Moving right along to our consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you,
Seconded.
Jamie. Great. Any discussion regarding the consent agenda? All right. We'll have a vote then.
Okay, Trustee Ackman,
Yes.
Trustee Kleinman,
Yes.
Trustee Leha,
Yes.
Trustee Moore,
Yes.
Trustee Solomon,
Yes.
Trustee Trudeau,
Yes.
Trustee Vanderbroek.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Terrific. Okay, moving on to citizens' comments.
I have not received any. There have been none.
Great, thank you. Josie, financial reports.
Oh, thank you. So you have approved the check register, or you've seen the disbursements in the consent agenda. But in the regular agenda, the cash, including investments, by the end of February, was $11,875,797,000. As of the end of February, the library had received $17,399,704, which is a little 101% of the annual budgeted tax receipts, which is indicating that our tax receipts will be more than what we anticipated them being. So that is, we started expecting that several months ago, but this is where we start seeing that occur. So you see the fund balance activity, your revenue is good. And the expenditures, the year-to-date revenue over expenditures is $1,757,299. Current revenue is at 66.23% of the approved budget, and current expenses are at 56.38% of the approved budget after 8 months, or 66% of the fiscal year. And there isn't anything surprising in those numbers. Actual cash receipts are 100.9%, and the actual cash expended is 60.32% of budget. So grants and memorials is pretty self-explanatory, and not much has altered, but the what you're seeing in front of you from the Friends have not been able to donate money to the library this year, in addition to the $25,000 they gave at the beginning of the year, and will not be able to for the remainder of this year. And so that's just part of the fact that the book sales, the shops are not open, the libraries are not open, so it's impossible to sell the used books except online, which is a limited reach within the scope of what they're doing. So they're doing really well for what they're trying to accomplish, but it is not the same amount of net that they normally have. So in the balance sheet, the general fund, the capital fund, restricted grants, and total governmental funds are divided out and shown for the 8 months ending on the 28th of February. There isn't anything here that is surprising or unusual for this time of year. In the statement of revenues and expenditures in the general fund, I want to call out some information Molly had asked about the last meeting about non-resident fees, and we were able to pull that information apart in order to put it into the financial document. And going forward, we will be able to pull that information apart so that you can see the non-resident fees. We've had a very year-to-date actual, just a little over $1,000 in non-resident fees. And then in the library fines and fees, we have had 14,000 total out of a budgeted amount of 150, and 19,000 was budgeted for non-resident fees. I want to say though, with the non-resident fee, primarily what a library card, when someone buys a library card from Ann Arbor, primarily what they're doing is buying the opportunity to check out our materials. The online access that we provide is provided primarily through the Michigan Electronic Library, and that is available to all citizens of Michigan in whatever library district, wherever they live. So there isn't, while there are some databases that we purchase that aren't purchased through the state, it is not in the amount that would be the contributing factor to a person's decision to buy a non-resident card. And currently a non-resident card costs a household, everyone in the household with access, $150 a year, which is not an expensive purchase for the amount of material and the types of items people can check out with that card. So what we did, pull it apart so you can see it's where those numbers are. So I just want to make sure we saw that. So did that answer your questions, Molly?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, so you can see on the year-to-date percentages where we are in other ways in terms of the kinds of activity that we have with our budget remaining. You can tell that we're going to have a budget of pretty good amount of money left over, and that the library will recommend to the finance committee that at least $1 million is placed in the capital fund balance rather than all the money being placed in the general fund balance for work that will need to be done in the coming year, big expensive work downtown. But so we'll talk about that more as we move through a budget process. But I wanted you to see where those items are in this budget. And then the statement of revenues and expenditures and governmental funds, the general fund, the restricted grants, and the total governmental funds, which is everything, is the last page. So if there are any questions about the financials as we presented them, I'll be happy to try to answer them this evening.
I have a question.
Right.
Just because I'm new at this. So we are at over 100% of what we anticipated in tax receipts. We've got 4 months left in the fiscal year. Do tax receipts come in evenly over the year, or do they come in at a particular time?
No,
So
they
are we-
come in. Yeah, they come in at a particular time, and then they're
Okay.
accrued through the budget. So I don't expect to see that number jump high.
Okay.
But I think there might be some more tax money coming in, but it's mostly, we have most of it.
So we pulled in most of it, so we will go probably a little bit more, but not
Right.
a lot more. Okay, great.
Right. Yep. Any other questions?
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josie.
Mhm.
Moving on to committee reports. We are, as I mentioned last meeting, establishing a pattern of executive committee meetings that happen from 5:45 to 6:45 p.m. On the same day as our public meeting. So we did have a meeting today at 5:45 p.m. In that meeting, we did just a quick review of the agenda for this evening. We did also discuss some of the preliminary items regarding a kind of reopening timeline and some of those considerations, which we will discuss in much greater detail later in the agenda today altogether. We touched on budget planning process, which is underway for 2021, 2022. Josie did mention the budget surplus that we will likely have at the end of this year, roughly $1 million plus, mostly related to the fact that we have underspent in many categories due to the pandemic. And that the recommendation that she will make, as she has said, will be for us to move those funds directly into the capital fund to be used for glamorous improvements like new roofs on downtown. I think that it's worth also mentioning that as a part of that conversation, to remember and remind ourselves that there has been an extraordinary amount of work done on our facilities over the past months while we've been closed, that will really make them sort of sparkle and shine when we're able to reopen, hopefully later this year. Like the facilities are going to just look like tip top notch shape, including a really. Josie said she was picking tile today for the children's area bathrooms, which have been renovated, and so there's a lot to look forward to and a great story to tell our community about how wonderful it will be to be back in the buildings. And we have begun the director's evaluation process for Josie's annual assessment. Josie has submitted her self-evaluation to the executive committee, which is me, Corrine, and Dharma. We three have reviewed her assessment, and this evening we gave her our initial feedback on her self-assessment. And the next step is for Josie to review her assessment based on the feedback she received tonight, and then she'll be giving me a draft that I will then distribute to the entire board. And what happens next is you all read Josie's assessment, and there's a form that we provide you for each of you to give individual feedback to the executive committee. Once that has happened later in April, I'll compile all of that and begin to draft our board response to Josie's self-assessment. And then that moves us along in the process to eventually provide Josie with essentially a board assessment letter in public once we've had a chance to process through this as a group. So that will unfold over the next few months. So just be on the lookout for your, what's required of you in your email inbox soon. I'll just say that, it's been a crazy year. And we have a lot to be thankful for in Josie as our very fearless leader. So more on that soon. Anything else that the other executive committee members want to add? Great. I'll turn it over to Dharma for Budget and Finance Committee updates.
Okay, so we met a couple of weeks ago on the 10th, and we mostly talked about the 2021-2022 budget development. We got an update that the department heads are working on their budgets and don't expect a huge change from this current year's budget. I think we're expecting some minimal increases to the health insurance, so that will be reflected in the budget. And once again, you guys or our committee will review the draft budget in April, and then you'll be seeing it at the April board meeting. We also discussed data that Eli gathered on overdue fines. I won't say much about that because we're getting a presentation on that tonight. But it was very enlightening to look at that analysis under the current circumstances. And then we talked about the renewal of the Oxford lease, which is, I think, coming up soon. So we're looking at another 5-year lease. Did I cover everything, other committee members? It was nice to have Karen back. She takes very thorough notes. So there's a lot here. That's it.
Any comments, reflections, questions on these committee reports? I wonder if when we go back to real life, if everyone will just do this. All right, moving on. Josie, your director's report.
Thank you very much. The first thing you should know is that the Public Library of Ann Arbor and Sacramento, California County Library in Sacramento were both called out in print this past month in Good Housekeeping of all places for the way we offer tools and the way we check out the tools and the instruments, and then sewing tools, and also classes and how we're helping people understand how to use tools. So taking you to a hobby for a test drive by checking out an instrument. Libraries in Ann Arbor, Michigan and Sacramento are among those that lend instruments. So we thought that was worth pointing out to you. Also, this this feels a little weird, but I think it's important for you to know it happened. The School of Information highlighted me as an alum and an adjunct professor of information at UMSI during Women's History Month. And so I was incredibly gratified and touched by this, and just want to say thank you to them for this, and to share it with the board of the library. And we are very happy to be moving along with our Black Lives Matter mural project. And these are some of the drawings and some of the work that people have done up to now for the banner that'll go along the fence on Library Lane to the north of downtown Library. And the lettering has been fabricated, and artists are closing in on finishing their pieces. We're looking at a handoff to us in mid-April for an April 27th, 29th installation, and that's all weather permitting. A dedication event will be determined after the installation in terms of date and how we'll process through that. But this is a glimpse at some of what people were presenting. So wanted you to see that. Shelf service continues to get rave reviews, particularly with patrons looking for books for school-age children. And these are some of the the comments that people are sending in with them. So we're really happy. Shelf service will continue into what will be the new normal. This has been so popular, and it's that reader's advisory in a paper bag. And for those of you who know what that is, it makes total sense. And why didn't we think of this before, right? So we will definitely continue to do this. And this goes back to the comments in Good Housekeeping and how it's so appropriate. This person made her dress. It's her Easter dress. And she's talking about the fabric, how she hacked 2 patterns to come up with this pattern. And she's so excited about it. She sent us a photograph of herself with her dress that she made with a sewing machine that she checked out from the AADL. So congratulations to her on a successful project. And this is another interesting, this person's neighbors had a paper business that they've closed, and they gave her a lot of paper, and she took a die cutter from the library and created all of these different butterflies. And she talks about the different papers and how they are represented here. So she sent a photograph, and so we were happy to show this to you. And then this is another one that came up, surprising to me, about the same time as the U of M SI tweet. The Book Fest Ann Arbor Book Society has delved into our archives, and brings up information about book society work and book festivals. And they found where in 2007, the Carytown Community Book Award was given to me. And it was a great pleasure and an honor to receive it. So there's the printed newspaper about it. So, and then our podcast by Jacob Gorski on the Gayest Generation received notice from no less than other personage than Dana Nessel, who I have to read this out loud because I can hear myself saying such a thing. Hi, Jacob. We don't know each other, but if you ever refer to me as an LGBTQ plus elder, I will end you. Perfect. Just perfect. So we really appreciate this. Dana Nessel, thank you very much. And Jacob loves it. So that is a short director's report. I will say, that we gave you all good, positive, upbeat stuff tonight because we're just thinking we need it. We do still receive complaints. They are all available on our database, our comment database on our website. Right now, they're primarily centered around everyone's ready to get back to normal. Everyone's ready to come back in the library. And so we have a lot. The complaints I'm getting are pretty much the same, in that people want the library open and they don't understand why it's not. So I will just say that. But those comments are in the database. They're available. So thank you. If anyone has a question, I'll be glad to answer it. Thank you very
It's
much.
nice to hear some upbeat stuff. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah, no questions. It's just a fun report tonight. Thank you.
yes. So sometimes it's not easy to carry it off as a fun report, but we could this time. So we did. Thank you.
Great. We'll move on to the next item, which is old business.
Yeah,
and we have some thoughts about the IDI assessment.
Yes, I wanted to bring you up to date to let you know that Anna and Scott have been contacted by the Intercultural Competence Edge staff to do the assessments that we all did before they were elected to the board. And now that they have completed their assessments, or when they complete their assessments, we will have a full complement of everyone on the library board, and the management team have been assessed. And so Michael Carter, the CEO of Intercultural Competence Edge, has let me know that they are more than happy, and they do this regularly, to come to the board meeting, and then this likely would be Zoom, to talk through the library's results and what the indications are and how to carry forward from where we are now. How do we maintain our position and to make it better and to improve it? And what are our biggest challenges? And what do we need to be thinking about? So I wanted to bring that to you as a possibility, and so that you can let me know if that is something that you're interested in. I can arrange for that to happen.
What do folks think? I would be on board with this, and Josie, you know, suggested that we talk about it in part because, you know, they're like, I think we've talked about the IDI a lot publicly, but it's hard to really actually understand what it is unless you kind of dig into it a little bit more deeply, like for a public who's kind of watching meetings and hearing us talk about it.
Confidentiality would be completely held and carried. It would not. There would be no one individually would be discussed. So it's the summary of the results.
The aggregate report.
Yes,
Yeah.
the aggregate reports.
I definitely think it would be valuable for us to do, and you know, helpful with our ongoing Black Lives Matter discussion, and you know, all sorts of issues as they come up. It's good to sort of talk through where we are as an organization and where we want to be and steps on how we get there. So I think it's definitely a valuable conversation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I will just say I did get to meet with the person who did the IDI, and she got to go through it with me, and I found it really interesting and helpful. And so I've completed it, and I agree. I think it would be really helpful to get have more support from that organization to really help us to come up with ideas of how to implement it. I also, is now a good time for me to ask a question about this?
Yes.
Okay, so I know that people have partnered up when you all did this before, and I was just sort of curious what that process was like and where you're in that process with each other. And like, I would be interested in, you know, having, because I think it's just me and Scott, so maybe Scott and I could buddy up or something, but I just got the report like 2 days ago, or the plan for, you know, what I should do to like fill out those questionnaires and things like that. And so I was just kind of curious about what everybody else has been doing with it.
Yeah, I think like it's been pretty informal. I mean, it's except that we did sort of commit to each other that we would have one, you know, at least one, like right after that, we would have one conversation with our buddy about kind of what we were, you know, what we're unpacking as a result of it. And obviously, because it is individualized and personal, we haven't done, you know, we haven't like debriefed that publicly. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be good, you know, since you and Scott have just done it, I as the president will assign you as buddies. The former president assigned us our buddies. So I will assign you as buddies to have an informal conversation about what you learned. And maybe you can do that, you know, before the next board meeting. And then, yeah, I mean, I also think, Josie, it could be interesting for us to, I mean, part of it is like, what's our comfort level to work through these really complicated issues. And the IDI is really focused on your personal growth and development in relationship to kind of your organizational interface. So I wonder if, we can ask the facilitators and the consultant to think about what a next kind of activity might be as for us as a group, as it relates to having done the IDI. Or we can all just talk about what we think we should do next.
Well, Jim,
Yeah.
my buddy rolled off. So if the buddies are important moving forward, I would love it to have a
We need
new.
a new one.
But I also just echo that, what Anna and Kareen said, that I think it would be valuable for us. I feel like it's the kind of thing that might benefit from some structure and like external momentum.
Yeah.
So I think that we could get those two things from having this process, like engaging with the process.
I mean, one of the things that, I just met with her on Thursday, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. And one of the things for me that really struck me was this idea of a developmental model, where it's like you have to move through these phases. And that if you're farther along in this developmental model, like one of the tasks for people who are farther along is to learn how to engage with people who are not as far along, whether that be children or people who have not had as much exposure to, intercultural ideas. And so, that to me really struck me as something that I think the library could take that developmental paradigm and learn about, like, what does that look like, right? Like, what does that look like when a board turns towards people who are earlier on in that developmental trajectory, or what does that look like when leadership is helping staff to move along that trajectory? So like, how do you as an organization kind of create intentional stepping stones for people to move in their development?
I think it's really interesting, and it's also sparking for me questions about programmatically, that's a sort of framework that's interesting to consider, and it's also making me wonder what the next sort of set of activities is that unfolds. And there have been some things that have happened up to this point. There's been public programming. So I think a part of that is maybe even the executive committee with Josie talking about kind of what it, where might there be moments for us to kind of learn together as the board and maybe staff leadership. And what is the plan as for the staff to, in addition to their individual kind of development plans. We should flag that to talk about, Josie.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So do I hear that you'd like a public meeting discussion with the IDI CEO about the library's summary?
Yes.
To get you started on the conversation about then what next?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Then I'll talk to him and find out what their schedule is and how that fits with what we do, and I will do that.
Molly?
Yeah, I think this is related to this and also to our Black Lives Matter discussion that is on the agenda for a little bit later on. But I've been thinking for the last couple of months about ways that we might start to expand outwards in our talking about racial diversity, racism, white supremacy, which has been centered around the Black Lives Matter conversation for the last year, which I've really appreciated. But I think especially the events of this past week have shown that the impacts of white supremacy are broad and they affect a lot of different groups. And I've been wondering about the way that we can, or a way that we can sort of expand that lens, ideally not at the expense of an ongoing Black Lives Matter conversation, but talking about bringing IDI in and thinking about those next steps, I would love for that to include some thinking about like an ongoing way that we as a board can be sure that we're continuing to address and think about these issues. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Mhm. Yeah, it's a little, I mean, honestly, like all of you, or many of you, I don't know what, I don't have any expertise in like where we find the space to like, just as a group to learn, given around topics that are like very, you know, where we have to do our personal exploration but we're also obligated to be in the public. And so that's like one thing that I am thinking about, because there must be a way, right? And some of that relies on our own, like, you know, personal levels of tolerance for sort of that kind of vulnerability in the public space. And then the other piece of this too is, yeah, like we've really built this kind of incredible set of programs and culture changes, and in a very like highly visible way around BLM this year. And what does that mean then now for opening the lens up further? I mean, and the wonderful thing is there's an amazing staff to think about that, but also I think it's important for like the form of this meeting for us to just like, what we're saying is that like this work grows, it continues. We want staff learning to keep going. We want our own learning to keep going. We want programming to keep evolving. And I also think just like, what does it mean to have goals in this space? Like, what do those goals really look like? And how do we chip away at them?
I will say, Jim, I mean, it's hard on Zoom, I suppose,
Yeah,
but we haven't done a retreat.
yeah, I know. I was just
usually,
thinking about
usually the retreats are centered around a topic or something.
yeah,
Depending upon when you might want to be in person, if you don't want to do it in Zoom, that could be in this year somewhere.
yeah.
This upcoming year, and how to focus on that, and that's generally led. There's usually an outside person who comes and helps lead those conversations, and that one would, could be the board and senior, and then administration. It's possible. I mean, that's. I know that we are talking about, because we had done unconscious bias in staff meeting, and then IDI as a board and as management. And there's room for us with the staff now, if we are able to do it, to introduce some of the IDI assessment tools, not as you were assessed or we were.
Yeah, but in a sort of,
yeah, in a larger way.
right.
Right. So I think that that we'll be thinking about that internally for the staff in this coming year. So it's possible to think about it in terms of a retreat.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Okay. But in the meantime, I will contact Michael Carter and see about having, once everything's done and finished with Anna and Scott, and then talk about having a possibility of a overview and a report back. Okay. Great.
Yeah, I'll just chime in to say I also completed my conversation. I think mine was right after Anna's on Thursday. So, and I definitely appreciated the opportunity to kind of go through the process, and it's a framework I hadn't previously encountered. So it was helpful and interesting. And I agree, like figuring out how we might proceed is definitely worth exploring. So look forward to hearing more.
All right. Anna, always good to ask questions at any time. And it's a good reminder to all of us that like these meetings can like feel like they have a super high level of formality, but we're all empowered to, you know, use our time together in whatever way makes sense, by adding agenda items, by asking questions. I know it's sort of a silly thing to say, but I remember when I first started on the board, I like don't think I said anything for a whole year in a board meeting because I was so afraid of breaking the rules. Now you can see I've conquered that fear. Moving on to new business, we do want to talk about the reopening timeline and considerations that the staff is working on.
Thank you. So Eli has a slide for you to see, and I'll start this conversation. So this is just a reminder of our service phasing plan that we have had on our website and in front of you for a while. It's based on the mystartmap.info from Washtenaw County, where daily new cases per million, it's a 7-day rolling average is their primary metric. And you can see what we have decided, that we would have reduced vestibule service in E and D, and then vestibule service in C, B, and A, and then low browsing would begin. So right now we're in D, so we have our vestibule service, and we were in C last week, and this week we're back in D. We've been in E for a long time, and most of the counties around us remain in E. E is the highest level for risk. The UP is all at C right now, but most of the lower peninsula is at D. If you look at the map, you'll see now that's changing. It's encouraging that we went back to C. I mean, we're all feeling really good about that, and then it bumped back to D. So we've said that browsing service would begin when we in the county are at low. So based on the way the trends are going, and we were encouraged last week to hope that this would be continuing down. It's not clear with the bump from spring break as anticipated what that's going to look like. But what we've done is we've understood that it's going to take us a couple of months to get ready to reopen for browsing service. So we've begun what we can on our end, that process, because it's possible that we could be reopening for browsing service in early summer. And that's absolutely our hope. So what that would mean is that the library buildings would be open for browsing. All the collections would be available. The general public would be coming in to choose their own materials, bringing it to self-check or to a public desk for checkout in the traditional way. The vestibules would be taken apart and removed. So we would have a closure of 2 to 3 days once a decision was made about reopening for browsing and computing. We'd have a closure of 2 or 3 days in order to get the vestibules down, deconstructed and out of the way. And then we would open back up. And so we would begin probably with the hours we have now, noon to 8, until we saw what the demand was going to be and how we were going to be handling it. We would continue with locker reservation and pickup, because there will be those in the community who are not interested in coming into the library with other people for any reason. And so we want to honor and respect that, which we know would be the case. So locker pickup is available at all locations except downtown, and it would continue. The computing would be available. We would reduce computing, 1 computer for every 3 spaces we have now. So people would be separated. There would be 2 empty spaces, normal spaces between computer users. Our sessions we would have a session limit of an hour at a time. Depending on demand, people could continue or not. So it just would depend on the demand of the computers. Right now, we don't have session limits, so we didn't have them when this all began. But we feel like we're going to start with that, and if we don't need it, then we'll make a different decision as we go. The bathrooms would all be open. The staff would continue to be masked. We would ask the public to wear masks. We would offer masks to the public, but we are not going to ask the library staff to try to force that issue with someone who is not wearing a mask and refuses to wear a mask. We've all seen enough about how that goes to not want to be in that space. And so we would allow a person who refuses to wear a mask to get their material, check out, and leave the library without a confrontation. We have those confrontations now with people in the vestibules who will not wear a mask. We know how that goes in that environment, and we are not interested in bringing that type of confrontation into the buildings with other people who are using the library. So we won't do that. We will remove furniture in such a way that it reduces the number of people lingering for long periods of time. So the hope is that people will come in, browse, get their material, use computer as necessary, and then move along out of the library. We won't be counting people. We won't be timing people. Our capacity is such that we don't need to do that. We will ask people to social distance. We will have decals on the floor where people would queue for services. We will have hand sanitizer stations at entries. We will have them at the self-check machines. We expect a little bit of a disappointment when we first open for browsing. Our study rooms will not be available. Our meeting rooms will not be available. We will not be booking those out to anyone at the beginning till we move more into less infections and we're more comfortable that we can manage the crowds. Our children's areas will be available, but toys, puzzles, and iPads will not be available. And that is not about fomite. That is not about transmission. That is about limiting how much time people are in the space together. Because when you bring people into a public space the way we do, all ages, there will be people coming into the library who are not vaccinated, all ages, and there will likely be people coming in who are ill. And while that has always been true for any illness ever at the public library in the community, this is a significantly different situation, and we want to invite people in to come in and get material, to be here, but then to move along as soon as they found what it is they're looking for. That being said, it is the public library. If a person comes in and decides they want to be here all day, and this is where they can be safe, warm, and cool, they will be here, and we will say nothing. They will be able to be in the public library for as long as they want to be in the public library. So we're going to be balancing this all out and managing it without with as little confrontation and upset as we can. The staff will be protected with plexiglass, and they will be masked and socially distancing, as we've been all along for a while. So that is how we're going to begin, when we begin, and we're all watching that needle go down in the right direction and hoping that it goes down sooner rather than later. So I'm happy to answer questions if I can, but we're not talking dates, not anything near specific right now.
So this is related. I know I asked a couple months ago about vaccine access for staff, and staff are not considered essential workers. Now that the state has opened up vaccine access to a much broader range of people, I'm wondering if we're giving people time, like leave time to go and get the vaccine. Like how is that piece of our preparation working?
So we met today. We're starting this week to meet in large groups of the staff, and we absolutely promoted their getting out there right now and getting on the list and taking a vaccine opportunity wherever they can find it, whether it's in Northern Ohio, at Ford Field, in Ann Arbor, at any pharmacy, wherever, and to get those vaccines and take that opportunity. And if a person said to us, I'm supposed to be doing the vestibule shift on Saturday morning, but I got a vaccine appointment, we're going to say, go get the vaccine. There's not a question about that. And while we can't require it, we are certainly encouraging it and can accommodate people's need to travel to get a vaccine if that's what they have to do. So we're doing that. If we reach a point in time whenever we know we're going to be open and we realize that we do not have enough staff vaccinated to safely be working in the public area, then we'll reach out to our county department and ask about a vaccine clinic for library staff, because we are a public serving entity. But it looks as though that most people who want a vaccine are going to be able to get one before our opening, possibly. But we've also said to the staff, if you're scheduled for vaccination and we decide to open and we're open, you're not going to be placed on a public desk until after you've achieved your vaccination. But that's if you're scheduled for one. There will be people on the library staff who choose not to get vaccinated. And that's where we're not able to compel this. We are certainly encouraging it. So, thank you, Molly.
Jamie?
I have a question about the masks. I remember when we talked about this before, I felt really concerned that the staff would be in that position. And so I felt really supportive of not making the staff have to have that conversation with difficult patrons. But then, in watching what's happened with my husband's business in the last while, like sometimes the staff are, or at least my perception is that they feel like they want my husband to be the one to tell the people to wear the mask. It's like, yes, that's a difficult thing to say to someone, but it's also, there might be some people on staff who feel, like they want patrons all to wear masks. And so they feel like someone should say something. So I just wondered what, like in your talks with the staff, like how the staff are feeling, like if they decide they're not going to enforce it, then there are going to be people who are not wearing masks. And I wonder how comfortable they are with that.
There are people now who are not wearing masks, people coming in the vestibules who are not wearing masks, and other people waiting to come into the vestibule are waiting outside because they won't be in the vestibule with someone without a mask. And we deal with those confrontations now. And so because we see the response by the people who are choosing not to wear a mask, and I'm just going to be real straight with you. They want to fight. And they're doing everything they can to picket. And what I'm not willing to do is tell the library staff, you have to do that. If it becomes a significant problem where the staff are feeling not supported because people are allowed in the library without masks, then we'll have to rethink it. But I didn't hear that today. What I saw today was relief that they weren't going to be put in front of that wasn't going to be where they had to be.
Okay.
And that includes the safety staff, because this is no different. So if we hear differently, Jamie, if we feel like you're not supporting us by not enforcing it, but honestly, it's not enforceable. Not in a public space the size of the buildings we have. As soon as somebody walks in, they can pull it down. It's not enforceable. So we're going to be masked. We're going to be behind plexi to the extent that we can be. And if a person comes up to a staff member who's not wearing a mask and they won't socially distance, that staff person can remove themselves to the back of the staff area of the library, we can refuse service if a person is not being respectful of us. And that I will say to them, I hope they do, is they know that I expect them to stand up for themselves in that way and just put their hand up and say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, and walk away. And I'm saying this publicly about service at the public library, but this is a silly, ridiculous situation to be putting staff people in who are trying to deliver you public service. And I don't mind people knowing I feel that way about it.
Thanks, Josie.
I I'm curious if you've been in contact with some of the smaller, like I know Dexter opened up recently, and if you've talked to, like, I know there is a much less complicated, smaller district but I'm curious if you've had like anecdotal knowledge of how it's going for some of these other libraries who are opening their doors.
Dexter's open and Salem South Lyon are open. Dexter and the thing, and you're right, it's not as complicated. It's a single building. Their use is very small compared to ours in terms of numbers, people in their buildings. And as far as I know, what they've been requiring of their customer, their patrons, they've had pretty good compliance. I do know at South Lyon, the staff are behind the plexiglass, and it's clear that's where they are, and so there's a barrier there that isn't breached. We won't be able to accomplish that because we're out putting material away and we're doing the other things we do. That's why I said if someone comes to staff and doesn't respect the distance, then I'm not going to ask someone on staff to continue to serve directly with someone who's not backing up when asked. I know the people who work in those libraries, and they're doing what they're doing. Not everybody is as comfortable as others about that proximity within the buildings, but they've been doing it, and that was what their community and their boards decided that they needed to do. Different altogether. I think it's important to understand the incredible difference in use. And Eli's going to show you some slides in a minute. We almost had the same number of amount of activity in February of this year as we did in February of last year. I mean, and that's without the buildings being open. And he's going to show you a number of how much of the collection is being used. More items from the collection are actually being touched now than were in the year prior. That's an amazing thing. I mean, really. And so I think that while I am grateful that my colleagues are able to accomplish something right now that others of us can't, I don't rely on their experience to inform my decision, because the differences are so great and what we have to deal with every day. So I'll just stop it there. But it's a fair question, Anna, but it's not as simple, apples to apples.
No, and I very much understand that, that this is a much more complicated, much broader system, much more diverse, and just so much bigger. I mean, it's just so much bigger. Yeah.
Have we done an evaluation on HVAC in the facilities and the relative risk based or potential for improvements to reduce risk for people being in the buildings?
Yes, and you can ask Lynn more directly later in the meeting if you want to, but yes, we have, and we've upgraded where we can, and we will, continue to do that. There is, and I'll say this publicly because I met with the Friends of the Library last month and I talked to them about this. The basement area where they work, there is no ductwork, there's no plenum, there's no circulating, there's no HVAC. And so we're not able to do anything in that space to help with flow. And we are asking them to reduce the number of people in that space going forward. And we'll have some air cleaner standing, single machines around for them that will help with that, like my dentist's office has. But as far as being able to do anything in that area in terms of HVAC, we cannot. The amount of money it would take it's not warranted for what's required there. So other than that space, Scott, yes, we've been able to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else on where we're at with reopening? this will no doubt be a topic of discussion in every conversation we have for the next
Till we reopen,
forever. Yes, exactly.
which can't come fast enough for all of us.
Yeah.
We want that. We want to be in a library full of folks too. So it's just doing it carefully as we're continuing to do that. So,
Jim, I have one more question.
Mhm.
I guess I was thinking like, there must be kind of like a point at which you would anticipate the toys and the iPads coming back out and the meeting rooms opening and things. And I guess what I'm sort of perceiving is that maybe the plan is to kind of, let's just get through this first thing and see how that's going, watch the numbers, and then we'll kind of revisit that conversation. I mean, from my
Yes.
perspective, it seems like too much to try to like plan out. Like it's enough to plan to get to like this, which would be a big milestone. But I just wondered kind of what your thoughts are on like.
we are talking about it, Jamie, and what we've talked about is whatever the date is that we reopen for browsing, depending on the infection rates, which will be continuing to go down, we would imagine beginning to open back up normally 3 months or 4 months later. We will try to have the summer spectacular at Vets Park this year. And that's probably our only big gathering event in the summer. We're hoping that we'll be able to have Halloween and Tiny Expo in the lobby again, but we'll see, right? We'll see because of vaccination rates and how things are going and what's happening with the schools, because that'll be after school's supposed to be open, and we'll see what's happening. So it's still a lot of things to pay attention to and watch. But in our heads, we're thinking 3 to 4 months after browsing begins, then we'll open back up our meeting rooms, study rooms, start to have some events in the spaces slowly. And by January, be back totally, if we can start to get back open.
Mm.
Not soon enough for me, but it's where it is. So thank you. Good questions. Thank you all.
Thanks, Josie. Okay, let's move on to our discussion on overdue fines, which we're picking up on this thread.
This is Eli
Yes.
talking. Yeah.
Okay, so we've pulled together some data to compare pre-COVID to during COVID, because we have not charged any overdue fees or charged any bills since we closed in just about a year ago. Okay, March 13th. So it gives us a unique opportunity to see the impact on the rate of overdues, with the sizable caveat that there's nothing normal about library usage right now. However, it gives us some information upon which to judge the possible impact of keeping library fees at zero for overdues for media. Okay, so let's talk about what the data is that we were able to assemble here first. So this is comparing 2 8-month samples of data. Okay, pre-COVID from July 1st, 2019 to February 28th, actually February 29th, because 2020 was a leap year, February 29th, 2020, versus 8 months during COVID of July 2020 to February 2021. This gives us kind of like the best sample, because we opened for pickups in June 24th of July of 2020. So by July, we were doing some regular volume, but this does include the months when we had some restrained services and closures, such as November and December, we were closed for 3.5 weeks. And then there were a couple other closures here and there. But to compare these two samples, so this is totaling up all of these transactions. In the 8 months of pre-COVID, we had 8 million transactions. In the 8 months during COVID, we had 5 million transactions. Now, what's a circulation transaction? It's a checkout or a renewal. Now, this is important to understand because we are required to report renewals as part of the state aid report. So renewals are formally, in the world of library statistics, counted as circulation transaction. However, very few libraries have unlimited renewals. So because we have unlimited renewals, there are many users who renew all their items every day because there's no reason not to. So as a result, a lot of those transactions are not checkouts, they're renewals. It's still totally legit transactions, and that's the apples to apples that is used in the business. But when we're trying to make decisions like this, it's helpful to understand that. So just to make that comparison, that's 62% as many transactions across that entire period. So that's the total, 62% as many transactions. During that same period, this is actual checkouts of unique items. So 2.1 million checkouts pre-COVID, 1.4 million checkouts during COVID. That's 66%. So we were doing fully 2/3 of our business during the COVID period compared to pre-COVID. Now, what about overdues? Well, during pre-COVID, there were 535,000 transactions that were overdue. During COVID, there were 590,000 transactions, and that's against lower usage. So that's 110% as many overdues, as you would expect. Both our constant message to patrons being, please don't worry about your due dates, and then the removal of the fees and the bills and the things that incentivize people to bring things back. We'll talk more about that. Now, how many items circulated? In the 8 months pre-COVID, 497,000 unique items circulated, 373,000 unique items, 373,000 unique items circulated during COVID. That's 75% as many, which means the collection is being used more deeply because the circulation volume is only 62%. But we have 75% as many transactions. So the collection is being used more deeply than it would have been before. Then how many patrons did we see during that time? In the 8 months pre-COVID, we saw 40,000 unique patrons. During the 8 months during COVID, we saw 24,000 unique patrons. That's unique cards, okay? One of the big changes has been households that didn't already use one card to manage their borrowing. A lot more of them are doing that now. So we are seeing more households using a single card than we did before. But that's still 61% of the number of patrons. So pretty much in line with the other changes to the sample. And then finally of note, as Josie said, in February 2021, checkouts hit 70% of the February 2020 volume of checkouts. So we're continuing to do a very sizable percentage of the business that we would normally have been doing, despite only being available through pickup appointments. So let me stop and make sure there's no questions about this before we move on to more information about overdues. Any questions so far? Okay. So let's look at the percentages by which checkouts were on time or overdue. So this first pie chart is July 2019 to February 2020, the before times. And that blue wedge is the amount of checkouts that were returned on time. So basically 75% of checkouts were returned on time before, and another 20% of items were returned less than 1 week overdue. Okay, then you can see 3% of items were 1 to 2 weeks overdue, 2% of items were 2 to 6 weeks overdue, and only 1% of items were 6+ weeks overdue. That's when you get billed, basically 45 days after your due date is when you start getting bills. So comparing that to now, you can see a smaller percentage of materials have come back on time, but it's not a huge difference. So we had 26% of the items were 1 week due or less. And also during a lot of that time, we were quarantining stuff for 3 days. So a lot of that 1 week is stuff that was actually returned on time. Then you can see there's a higher percentage, 6% 1 to 2 weeks, 6% 2 to 6 weeks, and 3% of 6+ weeks overdue. And that's out of all of the checkouts in these two samples. Okay, so you can see, yes, fees do make a difference. But what we found is, what is the actual scale of the problem of overdue items? And here's really the takeaway. So comparing the circulation impact from before to during COVID. Before COVID, 97% of items were returned within 2 weeks of their due date. Okay, that is overdue, but it's not substantially overdue. And the stuff that comes back in 2 weeks is the stuff that's going to come back, go into someone else's hands. During COVID, 91% of the materials came back within 2 weeks of the due date. Okay, similarly, before COVID, only 0.8% of items were more than 6 weeks overdue, whereas during COVID, 2.6% of items were 6 weeks overdue. So yes, it makes a difference. If you made that into a percentage, someone who was trying to tip this one way might say, that's a 300% increase in overdue items over 6 weeks. But what this really shows us is that it is a narrow scale of the problem, that most items come back on time, even without fees and bills. So it gives a lot of room for the board to decide how they would like this to work, how they would like, what role they would like overdue fees to play in regards to media and tools, if any, and how to move forward with that. So one thing to consider, what we'd love to get from you today is some direction on what you'd like to see in a policy revision so we can bring you something to react to at the next meeting. One thing that would be helpful is with this change, it does increase the amount of overdue items, and that means longer wait times, although you can see it's not a large difference. However, there's a number of things that we might start doing in the absence of overdue fees that we might consider. Like, for example, right now, you can use your card completely until you hit $25 in balance account fees to the library, right? It may be that we want to establish some threshold of you can't check out new stuff when you have a certain number of overdue items or when your items are a certain amount of overdue. So we can sort of have different combinations of carrot and stick depending on what we're able to experiment with the system, as well as what guidance the board wants to give as far as how that, whether that's policy or procedure, what happens when you have overdue items. There's also a place in here for automatic renewals. One thing that we've talked about just on the admin team is that whatever we come up with for incentivizing returning things, one of our prime goals is to avoid embarrassment at the desk, right? We don't want to make people feel bad when they have an in-person interaction with staff. So that might be that someone, no matter what rules we decide to come up with how your card might be restrained if you have overdue items, that's not likely to apply at the desk. It's very similar to a lot of our other rules that we've had for years. Like one thing that we've said for years is that if you bring an item up to the desk that you found on the shelf and it's actually supposed to be on hold for someone else, you're taking it home because it's our mistake that it was there on the shelf where it shouldn't have been. And if you brought it to the desk, we're going to let you take it home and then another person gets it next. So we have a value of trying to provide that excellent service and minimizing bad interactions at the desk. So one thing might be is that we might say your account, you can't renew items online, or you can only place frozen holds or something like that when you have overdue items. And remembering that you would only have overdue items because someone else wants it. Because if no one else wants it, you can renew it and it's not overdue anymore. So this is only about overdue items that someone else is waiting for. So there's a lot of different ways that we could go about approaching that. Another suggestion was that we would send people a notice that said how many people are waiting for the item when they have something overdue, get a little social pressure applied or things like that. But with this value of us wanting to avoid, oh, I'm sorry, I never turned on my lights. With this value of people wanting to avoid, us wanting to avoid embarrassing, the library being embarrassing. We hear this all the time from patrons. And it's not really about us. It's about their middle school, or it's about a library that they went to in 1972 or something like that. It's like embarrassment is such a, people will send us email and say, I'm so sorry, I have 3 overdue items, and it's like, you're not even in the top 10,000 patrons in terms of overdue items. Please don't worry about this. So how we can turn that into customer service procedure is what we look forward to discussing with all of you. So any questions about this? Go ahead, Molly.
I wonder, and I realize if we're getting fewer fines and we're talking about buying more books, this is maybe not the right balance, but I wonder about ways to sort of keep an eye on the things that are chronically, like if there are items that are chronically overdue, or if there are items where the backlog is getting longer, if we can buy more of those.
Yeah, we already do that in a lot of cases. There's alerts that get sent when it gets too far out of whack. However, usually those are the most popular items, and we've already bought as many of them as we're willing to buy because we're going to be throwing them all away in 6 months.
Yeah.
Right. So in many cases, we hit those limits on popular items fairly quickly. But often the circumstance you're describing is when we've got 1 or 2 copies and suddenly there's 12 holds.
Yeah.
And then one copy goes missing. And then we are absolutely buying more copies. But in the circumstance where we already have 60 copies of something because it's hot this month, that's not a case where we would generally buy more copies in relation to hold times.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yes, thanks.
And I think you said this at another meeting, but the revenue from fines is minimal, correct?
Within the budget, if you look at the budget, the budgeted amount for fines was $150,000 for the whole year in a $17 million budget. So what happened is there was a time when fines was a significant amount of money in the budget, about $400 and something thousand. But we made the decision to do email notification 3 days ahead of the due date. And when we did that, our fine revenue just plummeted. And so what we knew, and from that experience, what we know is that if we notice people a certain way, and by notice them, I mean by email notice or text message, if we notice people a certain way that they have material that needs to come back, it does. It comes back. So as a revenue stream compared to the rest of the budget, we are telling you that we can sacrifice that revenue stream to recognize that people do bring material back and to try to mitigate the stigma of having material out too long or even losing material. And we would continue to work with people about lost items and paying for them. And we always negotiate how we do that. If a person tells us that I left it on the airplane, or my car was stolen, or we were in a car accident, and we've had, sadly, more than one situation where the house burned. And we're not going to ask for them to pay for those materials. We just aren't going to. So there are plenty of situations, and you have all sorts of family situations where we left the book at my dad's and we're not going back there for another week. We can't get it. Fine, right? We're going to work with you on that. So, and the folks at the desk know this and they deal with it all the time. So we're going, based on this data, we're actually prepared to ask you to allow us to eliminate the fines on media for this coming year. And we'll continue to, and with understanding that we're going to notice people at a certain point. We're going to work through when do we do that and how do we do that outside the policy, within procedures, what we'd like to do, until we find that balance of where most of it comes back. And then at the next year, when we're preparing the budget, we'll be able to report to you how this worked.
Yeah.
And do we miss that money so much that we need to have it? And I just want to remind you that while, yes, every penny counts, the collection budget for the library is $1.8 million. So fines have never paid for the collection. That couldn't even come close. So that's not something that people need to be concerned about. This will not stop us from buying library materials, new materials.
We're in a very financially healthy position as an institution. And this is given the equity questions embedded in fine collection, the stigma associated with overdue materials. It is not the space in the budget where we want to be nickel and diming, our community in order to make some kind of point. I do think that you're right, Josie, like next year at this point, we look at exactly the same presentation that Eli gave today. And there's a third column that says, okay, did taking them away make it worse or better or whatever?
Right.
And so I think that's important. I also gather from our conversation earlier that you're already building the budget with the idea in mind that for 21-22 that this comes out, and we'll talk about whether or not to approve that. This is the first time it even surfaced in my mind that with the Ann Arbor District Library being so good at gamifying just about everything, that, applying some of that learning from the summer game and all the other various activities that the library does to incentivize the return of materials and actually like reverse the thing, like you get something if you bring it back
Right.
on, get something else.
I thought of that too. I think that's
Right.
kind of a fun idea.
And
Yeah,
so I
clever.
honestly don't think, if you're willing to allow us to remove fines from the budget for this year, for us to run this year in this way, I don't think, as long as it's a conscious decision and we know we're making it, it isn't really necessary. We can suspend the policy around fines without eliminating it or revising it until we know what next year looks like. So we don't have to detail a fine policy where we're not really sure what's going to look like at the end anyway.
Mhm.
So we just would not be collecting fines on media and for this year, and that would be an understood. And then we would look at next year. And so we wouldn't have to change policy, wouldn't have to go down into depth into that. Sorry, you guys are going to hear dogs barking into that this year. So
Right. I want to keep us moving because we are in a long meeting.
Yep.
If you need a 7th inning stretch like I do, please take one, because this is like, if you've been like me and you've been in this chair all day today.
So Lynn, thank you, Eli.
Lynn's
That was
here.
amazing. Yeah, Lynn is here and he can snap to it. So I want to preface this next one with a little bit of background for the new board members. Normally, when we bring a contract approval to you, we bring it 1 month for review and the next month for vote. But because of COVID and timing and response rates on these RFPs, we're bringing you this snow and lawn service contract in one meeting with a request to approve it in this meeting. Normally, we wouldn't have done it that way. So I just want to make sure all of you know that. We did talk to the finance committee about this. So I'll let Lynn have the floor now, because I wanted to be the one to explain that. I did not want him to have to do that.
Thank you for that.
Great. So Len, I want to read this resolution first, and then get a motion for approval, and then we'll have you enter in here. So the board resolves, this is a resolution to award contract for lawn maintenance and snow removal services for 3 years. The board resolves that the contracts for lawn maintenance and snow removal services be awarded to McIntosh Grounds Maintenance Incorporated from April 15th, 2021, ending April 15th, 2024, for the annual bid amount of $71,750. Can I have a motion to approve?
So motion.
In a second?
Seconded.
Thank you. Len, let's discuss.
Yeah, so this is pretty standard. Our last contract was 3 years. And before that, we actually had snow and lawn separated. We had one lawn contractor and we had a separate snow contractor. We decided 3 years ago, we really kind of wanted one vendor, right? So we can deal with one exterior maintenance company. So we joined it 3 years ago, and just the contract ran out. We put it on the website for bid. I did solicit it to some local companies that were qualified. And we really only had 3 responses, which I was kind of shocked by. I'm guessing that's COVID related, because our facilities are, everyone's seen them, right? There's this huge landscape piece, this small lawn piece, and then there's the snow removal process. And the landscape is separate because of the controlled burns, the green roof, things like that. So we have 3 responses, which I'm actually happy with all of them. And that's where we are. So it's just really that time, the contract had ended. We needed to get it out. They typically start lawn April 15th. That was kind of the push to have it on this board meeting, so we could get that in place and have that contractor ready for spring.
What's the deal with the variable bid?
So that is, I put it on there because I wanted to trigger that question. So That is a tiered billing system, and it's
Okay.
more snow driven than it is lawn. I did get one solid number for all locations for lawn, but what they do, and some people do this when it comes to snow removal, it's tiered on the amount of snow you get in a year. So if it's 0 to say 23 inches for the annual accumulation, it's one price, and then it goes up. So this particular contractor had 4 different tiers. So the 61,780 is the lowest tier. The 90,460 is the highest tier. Depending on the snow accumulation for that year, that's what you would be billed. Some do it by push, some do it per event. There's a lot of ways to do it. I've always found that you're probably better off going with an all-inclusive, everything covered. You lose out on a few winners, but there's so many more salting and sidewalk events than there are plowing events in the state. Even today with our milder winters and things like that, there's still a lot of events where you'll have 30 or 40 times a year you're serviced, even though you might not have a big plow event. And so I've always tried to get it where everything's covered, no matter what type of winter we deal with.
Got it.
But yeah, that's the oddball. That's the
That's ball bid. Yeah.
That's the way they do it. And so they're not alone in that. A lot of organizations do it. It's a gamble.
Got it.
So Len, then is that your rationale for picking the Macintosh one? Is it because it's the lowest of the all-inclusive?
It wasn't really because of the lowest bid. It's only $4,000. Really what it was is when I met with them and discussed their process for snow removal, which is, again, our lawn is not, we don't have a ton of turf grass, right? We have a lot of native grasses that we manage through landscape contracts. So the snow removal part is the big part. The way they approach it and how they service throughout like a grinding all day snow. Josie knows this. I did snow removal for about 17 years. So from say 97 until I think 2012 or 13, if it snowed in Michigan, I was in the snow the whole time. They reminded me of the way we service sites. And you have to be prepared. You have to have backup equipment, and it's about the approach. AM Services, which we've been with for 3 years, has done a very fair job. We're not disappointed. I felt better about this level of service and how it was delivered and how it was promised. It felt more of what I would be accustomed to, or how I would plan out an event. Even walking the sites, we still had snow piles from that, I guess that 9 or 10 inches we got. They asked, well, why would they pile the snow there? And I just kind of grinned, and I thought the same thing, but I wasn't in the plow truck when that decision was made. But they asked the same questions I would have asked. So it wasn't about the price, really. It was about the feeling that I had with that contractor. And I think the level of service, especially with sidewalks, would be something we'd be happy with.
Other questions, comments, thoughts, feelings about snow?
I just feel lucky to be like guided through this by you, Len. Like that you're the number of things that you have this detailed knowledge about continues to astound me. And I feel grateful for your service.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, with that, let's have a vote.
Okay, Trustee Ackman,
Yes.
Trustee Kleinman,
Yes.
Trustee Leha,
Yes.
Trustee Moore,
Yes.
Trustee Solomon,
Yes.
Trustee Trudeau,
Yes.
Trustee Vanderbrook.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thanks very much. Right. And now we're moving along to a resolution to extend and amend the term of lease with Oxford Companies for 5 years. The resolution reads as follows: to amend and extend the lease with Oxford Company for 5 years, commencing December 1st, 2021 through November 30th, 2026 for the archive location on South Industrial Avenue in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Annual base rent will be as follows: $98,822. In 2022-23, it goes to $102,281.40. In 23-24, it goes to $105,861,024. In 2024-2025, it goes to $109,566.36. And in 2025, 2026, it goes to $113,401.20. That all resolutions and parts of this resolution that conflict with provisions of this resolution are rescinded. We're looking at page 18 in your packet for everyone that's following along. Can I have a motion for this resolution?
So moved.
Scott and Karina, is that a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. What do we need to know about this one?
Again, this is kind of straightforward. So we're at the end of our lease. Our lease is up in November, I believe, the end of November. And we've been happy. So we moved from a First Martin property over on Green Road to the South Industrial property. They built out the space for us. We had internal discussion with our archives manager. We've been pleased. The long-term goal is of course to probably one day have it in a AADL facility, but that's not going to happen today. So we're happy where we are, and it's conveniently located between downtown and Mallett's Creek, so it's a really good spot. And our staff's, it's on the bus route. It's close to places where you can get lunch, and that we thought about that when we moved there. And so it's just that time where we've either got to decide to renew or make a different decision.
And this is in front of you as a discussion,
Yes.
so you don't need to vote on this until next month.
Great. Well, we've already moved it, so if we want to vote on it, we can vote on it today.
Yes, you can.
We talked about this once already, didn't we? Like
Only that it was coming.
okay.
Yeah, not that we didn't have the details. Yeah.
So we talked about this in the finance committee meeting a little bit, and the questions I came with were answered in the discussion before I asked them, which were what would happen if we did, say, begin renovating downtown because the change of circumstances within the term of the lease, and we could house the archives there, as an example. And the lease does have a clause where we can, as I understand it, that we could get out of it with some notice if it was a property that we owned, or if we had the opportunity to acquire a property that we had, like currently. My other question was, like, are there properties, have we looked at buying them instead of continuing to pay the lease? And it sounds like we've also considered that option, and there aren't really appealing options right now. But if that were to change in the future, we have the ability to get out of the lease without being stuck with it for the term. Is that a correct understanding?
It is.
Yeah. Right. So I think that's with that optionality in the lease and the fact that we're happy with the space. Yeah, I think that this makes a lot of sense.
And I would like to challenge all the board to beat the terms of this lease and move the archive downtown before the 5-year term is up. Oh, the long-term dream. The long-term dream. Eli, did you want to say something? Because I saw your screen go.
Oh, no.
Okay, just
Yep.
checking. All right, unless there is a motion to table this to next month, I'm just going to call a vote. All right, let's do it.
Okay, Trustee Ackman,
Yes.
Trustee Kleinman,
Yes.
Trustee Leha,
Yes.
Trustee Moore,
Yes.
Trustee Solomon,
Yes.
Trustee Trudeau,
Yes.
Trustee Vanderbrook.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thanks,
So-
everybody.
So Jim, this next one is where we've added the agenda. Thank you all. I know Oxford will be glad to get this back from us a month sooner than they expect, and we appreciate you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you again.
No problem. Do you want me to answer the question about the HVAC? I know we are running
Oh,
long, but I could
Yes,
be quick.
please
Oh,
do.
no. Yeah, please.
Please do.
Okay, so I'm still learning. So if I say something incorrect, I'll correct myself down the road. So about a year ago, we were looking at everything that was UV light driven, what could be added to commercial HVAC and those types of things. The series of lights that it would take in say an air handler to actually get enough UV light to kill viruses it's an obscene amount, and then you're looking at a replacement of 6 to 12 months per bulb. It gets very costly, and we don't know that it's really effective. So About 2 months ago, through discussion with our mechanical contractor, there is a new thing out there that's really COVID driven. It's bipolar ionization. And what it does is it attaches to particulates. And that's the way to do it, because that way it's actually on the thing. It's on that little dust particle or even smaller. And it seems to be more effective. What I'm looking at now is there's actually grants for this, and what we would be eligible for, and then what that cost would be for us. So downtown we have 5 air handlers, and then at each branch location besides Westgate, we have 1 air handler. Westgate it's a commercial space, so they're rooftop units. It's not exactly the same thing. So I'm not sure this would, translate and you could attach it to that, but those are the things we're looking at. But the portable UV units are great for a small space. They'll do a job, but a large commercial building, when there's so much dust and there's so much basically debris moving back and forth between outdoor air and indoor air, this seems to be the new solution to this type of thing. But I just learned about it a few months ago, and I'm still gathering information. I hope to have something here in the next month or so of what it would cost us, and then what would we be eligible for, because a lot of schools and different government entities are doing this now. So what funding's available to us, whether it be a grant or not, and then what would our cost be? Because what I'm seeing, it's basically a unit that attaches to the supply air side. So it's not a huge device. It's just basically, it's about 3 or 4 feet long, and then another subsystem that's part of it. So I'll have more information, but that is the new thing that should be like kind of the future of clean air in commercial spaces. And that's what I know about that.
I'm just glad to hear that we're at least evaluating the options, and I think it's worth taking a look at the technology and looking for evidence-based results, so we're not just chasing something. But and I also am glad to hear we've at least done some evaluation of spaces within the buildings and what the ventilation situations are there, so we can understand at least to some degree what the relative risks are for people being in different parts of the buildings.
Well, and I don't know if this came up before, but we did. So early on, we got with our controls person, and we basically, actually I upset him quite a bit, but we did something that anyone in the mechanical industry would probably say we were crazy for, but we basically made a COVID purge, where we, at the end, when we close for the evening, your building goes unoccupied. Basically, everything shuts down to 30%. We opened the outside air dampers 100% to clean all of the air. So no old air. So we basically circulated all clean air. We did the same thing in the morning before staff returned. We had to dial that back during the winter because it got so cold. Your HVAC people would say don't do that because you're conditioning air, right? The whole point of conditioned air, if you bring in outside air, now you have to recondition it, but we wanted that fresh, clean air. So we've done that basically all year. We went through and revamped our whole control system last, April, May, and June. We've been doing that the whole time. We've stepped up our filter changes. So we've done a lot COVID related for over the past year, but it was things that we did on our side that we knew would help. And now it looks like there's going to be some answers out there for long-term solutions.
Great. Thanks for that detailed update.
I remember the air purges. I was fascinated by that. All right. Any other questions for Len while we've got him? Awesome.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Lynn.
Thank you, Lynn.
I did not mean to hustle us along. I just needed to stretch. All right. We have our added agenda item, which is essentially to pass a resolution to authorize remote board participation of AADL board meetings. Josie learned today that the Washtenaw County passed essentially another emergency act, which is allowing us to, if we so choose now, to continue to meet remotely as a public body, essentially through the end of the calendar year. Is there anything else you want to say about the context for this, Josie?
The context is pretty much that they use the Open Meetings Act legislative act, which I sent to you earlier, as understanding that they had the authority as
Yes.
the county commission to declare a state of emergency around COVID in relation to public boards meeting remotely. So it's not a general state of emergency where everything changes around the county about like it was earlier last year. It's just specifically about public boards being able to continue to meet remotely through this calendar year. And I thought as soon as I got their resolution and the information document that went with it, I wanted you to see it, and then it was in time for this board meeting, so that if you so chose to vote to meet remotely over the next 6 months, then we can do that. And if you decide at some point in that 6 months to begin meeting in person, then you can vote to do that. But this allows you to vote to meet remotely for the next 6 months.
And just to be clear, before this happened, we would be back to meeting in person next month.
That's correct. And we would have had to have the social distancing requirements, the mask requirements would have been in place, so that we would have had to met in a place in the public library so that we could have accommodated any number of people who might want to come. Because if you're open physically, you can't turn people away. And even if you're meeting remotely, you still would have to be able to accommodate them. So many public boards were, finding themselves in situations where their facilities just weren't going to accommodate that kind of spacing. Plus, there's the risk to the public requiring them to come physically if they want to make a statement to a public entity. And so the county board chose to declare the state of emergency so that public entities could make this choice for themselves.
I'm going to read the resolution now. Whereas pursuant to the Open Meetings Act, public bodies may meet entirely remotely after March 31st, 2021 and up to December 31st, 2021 if a local state of emergency has been declared. And whereas pursuant to Act 390 of 1976, the Emergency Management Act, as amended, the chair of the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners, Sue Schink, declared a local state of emergency exists in Washtenaw County as of March 17th, 2021, due to sustained presence of COVID-19 within Washtenaw County. And whereas by declaring a local state of emergency, public bodies within Washtenaw County will be able to conduct remote meetings while the emergency is in effect as permitted in the Open Meetings Act. And whereas the local state of emergency shall continue to be in effect until December 31st, 2021, unless a change in circumstances justifies cessation by the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners by resolution at an earlier date. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the AADL Board of Trustees going forward through December 31st, 2021, or until the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners rescinds the local state of emergency, may participate remotely in AADL board meetings. All actions taken at AADL board meetings will require roll call votes. 2, that every effort will be taken to allow for public participation in any public meeting held by the Ann Arbor District Library Board of Trustees. And that 3, all resolutions and parts of resolutions that conflict with the provisions of this resolution are rescinded. May I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion.
This is a relief.
I am relieved from a health standpoint. I am disappointed from an extroversion standpoint.
Exactly. I didn't think that was nice that one time.
Yeah, that was nice. But we can do that when we feel like it's safe. It's not like precludes us from doing it.
I would love to see you all at a safe distance in a park outdoors at some point this summer. Not for meeting, but just to say hello.
Oh, that'd be
Molly?
great.
No, I was thinking about, I don't know how the retreat works, if that's something that has to be open to the public too, but maybe we can find an outdoor place in the summertime, like spring or later.
Yeah,
It does have to be open to the public, but that's a good possibility to think about that.
absolutely.
We also can all go to the summer game extravaganza.
Woo. Terrific. Any other discussion? Can we have a vote, please, Eli?
Okay, trustee Ackman,
Yes.
trustee Kleinman,
Yes.
trustee Leha,
Yes.
trustee Moore,
Yes.
trustee Solomon,
Yes.
trustee Trudeau,
Yes.
trustee Vanderbrook.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Great, thanks, everyone. Have we any citizens' comments?
Let me double check just a moment. None there. And none there. No, we have received no additional citizens' comments.
All right, y'all. That brings us to the end of our meeting. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you'll getting out to enjoy some fresh air while the weather is nice in this temperamental time of the year. I wish you all a very good evening, and we are adjourned.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Everyone. Thanks, everyone.